let's look at the most simple way to use Kontakt in Studio One. I've got a blank project here. I'm going to go down to the Browse button in the bottom right-hand corner to open the browser. I'm going to select Instruments here, and if you've got your instruments sorted by vendor like I have, then you can go down to your Native Instruments folder, expand that, grab Kontakt, and then just drag it out into your project. And then an instance of Kontakt appears here, and then you can add an instrument. Let's just add in a violin. I'll just expand this selection here, double click on the violin, and that gets loaded up, and I can now play it on my keyboard. Okay, very straightforward. Now, what if I want to add in another instrument? Let's just close this down. I'll just grab Kontakt again. I'll drag it into my project. Let's add in a string ensemble here. So I'll just do the same as I did before. I'll double click on that string ensemble. It appears over here. And just one more. Let's close this. I'll again drag Kontakt into my project. And let's just add in, I don't know, a brass ensemble. Okay, let's do that. Double click on there. The brass ensemble is there. Now this is great because if I close this down, you can see our 3 instruments are here in our track view. And as I select each of them, I can play that instrument. Not just that, but if we go to our mix view by clicking on the mix button in the bottom right hand corner, we can see that in the mix that we have a channel for each of these instruments. We can now mix them separately. We can add effects, we can add sends for them, etc. So we've got control over each instrument in terms of sound, and we can play them all separately. Now that's all very well, and I think when you're working on smaller projects, I'd probably recommend that's the way you should go ahead and use Kontakt in Studio One. However, it does have some flaws, mainly the fact that we're using the Kontakt plugin for every single instrument. Now this could have an impact on performance potentially, and is also not always the best way to organize things. So let's look at some different ways of doing this. Hi folks, I'm Mike, and I hope you're well. Recently, of course, Studio One 6 was released, and on just about the same day, I think, Kontakt 7 was also released. So I thought it would be a great time to take a look at using Kontakt within Studio One. Now, the good news is if you're using an older version of Studio One, then the process is going to be just the same. And if you're using an older version of Kontakt, the process is going to be the same. But I do have one new trick which is available to us in Kontakt 7. But first of all, I think it's really useful for us to take a look at what was going on under the hood as we dragged Kontakt into our project there. So I do think it's useful for you to understand what Studio One is kind of doing under the hood when you drag Kontakt into a project the way we did earlier. I'm going to do it a little bit differently this time and run through the manual steps that Studio One actually does automatically normally. Okay, now in order to demonstrate this, I do have my mix view already open. Okay, I'm just using the mix toggle switch for that, and I have this panel showing in the mix view, the instruments panel. If you can't see that, then just click on the little sort of piano icon there just to make sure you can see that. Now this time, rather than drag Kontakt in from the browser on the right into my project, I'm going to go to the plus button on the instruments channel here, on the instruments panel I should say, click on the plus button, then go down to my Native Instruments folder and then just click on Kontakt. And it's added Kontakt in there, and it opens up the Kontakt panel there, or the Kontakt interface automatically. Okay, and I'll do as I did earlier. I'll just grab an instrument and add it in. So I'll just grab this violin and add it into Kontakt. Now, if I play some notes on my piano keyboard, I get no sound. Okay, I will hear some sound, however, if I use my mouse and play the keyboard in Kontakt here. Now, just in case you can't see this keyboard, just make sure you go up to this icon at the top in Kontakt where we get our view options and make sure keyboard is selected there. Okay, I know some of you may get confused when you can't see these things. So I've got my keyboard there. I can play the notes on my keyboard in Kontakt, but I can't play them on my piano keyboard, which I'm trying to do now. You can't see this, but I'm trying to do that. no sound, okay? And that's because we haven't completed all the steps that Studio One normally does automatically, because we don't have any kind of instrument track connected to our Kontakt plugin. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go up here on the left-hand side. I'm going to right click and then I'm going to go add instrument track. Okay, we've created an instrument track. So this is a place where we can now play from and record from. And I'm going to assign it to our Kontakt plugin by selecting its output here on this drop down, going to Kontakt. That's the only choice we have at the moment. Yeah. And then we have it ready to be able to play that Kontakt instrument now. So now if I play some notes on my keyboard, we can hear that that's happening. So that's what's happening under the hood when you drag Kontakt into your project normally. It creates the Kontakt instrument here. It creates the output in the mixer for it, the actual audio part of it. It creates an instrument track, and then it connects that instrument track to your Kontakt plugin. Now, the good news is that even though we now understand what's happening under the hood, we can still go back to the simple way of adding Kontakt. So I'll just grab Kontakt and I'll drag it into our project like so. And again, I'll just load up that violin instrument like so. And if I play some notes on my keyboard, we can hear those. That's all working fine. So let's now add in another instrument, but this time I'm not going to add Kontakt again to the project. Instead, I'm going to add the new instrument in this instance of Kontakt, just using the one plugin. So I'll scroll down and let's add in that string ensemble. I'll double click on that. Now, you probably didn't quite catch what happened there, but in fact, over on the right hand side, if we scroll down, we can see that in this Kontakt plugin, we now have the two instruments, the violin and the string ensemble. Okay, let's just go ahead and add another instrument in. I'll scroll down here and I'll add in a brass ensemble. Again, I'll double click on that. And again, you didn't see what happened. But on the right hand side, if we scroll down, you can see now that brass ensemble is there. Just to make it easier so that we can see all three at once, I'm just going to click on this little icon here on these libraries, and that's going to minimize them. Okay, so we can just easily more navigate between the three. Okay, so we now have those three instruments in there. However, if I play some notes on my keyboard, only the violin is being played. Okay, we have no way at the moment to play the other two instruments we've added. So that's the next issue that we're going to deal with. So one of the things I want you to do as you look at the instruments that you've added into Kontakt here is to click on this little icon with each one, which is the information button. This one hasn't got it selected, so I'll just click on that. That's just going to make sure that we're going to see the information here that we want and need to see. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to point out to you is what automatically happened as we added each of these instruments, and you probably wouldn't have noticed it, but here it is. If we look at the MIDI channel for each instrument, you can see on this one it's channel 1, on this one it's channel 2, this one it's channel 3. That's important to understand. It's important for you to be able to see which MIDI channel is assigned to each of these instruments. Okay, so just remember, if you can't see that, click on that little eye icon there for information. Okay, and here's where our problem is, because some of the automated process that we saw that Studio One does is not being automated here, because Studio One's not really aware of what's going on inside of Kontakt. We have our track over here, but it's just assigned to one MIDI channel. It's not named MIDI here, but if you go to that track here in Studio One, click on this drop down menu, you can see event input 1. Okay, that sort of roughly relates to MIDI channel 1. So that is playing, of course, whatever instruments are on MIDI channel 1. In this case, it's the violin, which is assigned to MIDI channel 1. Okay, and we're not playing these two. So it's easy to solve this problem. All we need to do is go to the left-hand side, right-click, and add an instrument track. This is just an instrument track, okay? We're not adding another Kontakt plugin or anything like that. We'll add one in there. We'll select from here, from the drop-down, we'll select Kontakt. That's the name of the Kontakt plugin we added earlier, yeah? And then, next to where we've selected Kontakt, we'll now select Event Input 2. Okay, that relates to MIDI channel 2. Now, if I've got this track selected and now play, you'll see that now the string ensemble is being played rather than the violin. We'll do this again for the brass ensemble. So we'll right click over here, add instrument track. in the drop down menu, select contact, and then we'll make sure that we have event input 3 or MIDI channel 3 selected. Okay, and now we can use this one to play the brass ensemble. Okay, that's cool. Now, what I'm quickly going to go ahead and do now, just to make life a little bit easier for us, is to rename these. So the first one was the violin. Okay, the second one, we'll call that strings. And the third one was brass. Okay, so we now have independent control over each of these instruments. We can record our parts for them independently. Now, there's just one more issue that we have here, and that is, if you look, and when I play these different instruments, they're all coming from the same sound source, the same channel in our mixer here, okay? And we don't have independent control over being able to mix them or add effects or send them to different sends. So that's what we're going to solve next. Oh, just quickly before we get to that solution, I just wanted to let you know this is a brand new Studio One dedicated channel, and every single subscription, like, and comment is immensely helpful. I thank you so much in advance. Let's get back to that solution. So one of the things I want you to take note of with the 3 instruments that we've added here in Kontakt is the output for each of them. They are all assigned to output stereo 1, okay? Now, if we try and select another output for them by clicking on this little down arrow here, you can see we've actually only got one choice at the moment. So when we first of all drag Kontakt into Studio One, it just creates that one output. So we need to create some more outputs and then assign them to channels in our Studio One mixer as well. Now, there are some complex and manual ways of doing this, and there's also the easy way. Now, I think it's important to understand the manual way, and we'll look at that later. But first of all, I want to show you the easy way. So what I want you to do in Kontakt is go up to this icon up here, click on that, and just make sure that you've got outputs showing by clicking on outputs there. And then this little mixer appears, okay? And if we play any of our instruments, we'll see some activity on that mixer. But we don't have those outputs yet, and we're going to create them right away. Now, it's useful to do this kind of after you've created all of these instruments. You can do it again if you add some more, but I would tend to, create your parts first, have the stereo output, and then do this later. Up to you. But what we're going to do is go to this drop-down menu here, where we've got some useful kind of preset, almost like macros that we can take advantage of. So we're going to click on this. Then we're going to go down to batch functions, and then we're just going to select the first choice there. It's a bit of a long one. Clear output section and create one individual channel for each loaded instrument. Okay, we'll click on that. We'll get this box will appear to warn us that something terrible could happen. Don't worry about that. Just click on yes. Okay. And that's gone ahead and it's created some new outputs here. You can see them in the mixer, okay? It's actually named them to the instruments that they're assigned to, and it's reassigned all of these 3 instruments to these new outputs. So we no longer just have that one output coming from Studio One. However, if I go ahead and select my violin up here and play it, as expected, we can hear it. But if I select my strings and play them, we can see some activity here in Kontakt, but we hear no sound. And that's because we haven't connected these outputs to anything in Studio One yet, okay? So they're just sort of like outputs on a synthesizer which don't have any kind of cable plugged into them. We need to do that now. So over here in Studio One, I'm just going to, again, ask you to make sure that this instruments panel is showing, okay, which is at the moment. We did that by clicking on this little piano icon. In fact, what I'm going to do is get rid of this channel panel. Oh, I'm a poet and I didn't know it. So this channel panel can go. So I'm just going to click on that just so we've got more room. We can see what's going on. Okay. So we can see our instrument panel here. We can see our Kontakt instrument here, our Kontakt plugin, I should say. And then we're just going to click on it to expand it. Okay. Now we can see all of these outputs, but only one of them is selected. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to select the first 3 outputs here. Now, when I've got the strings selected, which I have now, I'm going to play them. Oh, they're very loud, aren't they? We can see that they're playing on this output here. If I select my brass instrument, you can see that that is now showing in this output here, okay? Very cool. We've now got control over each of our individual instruments, and we've done all of this by using just one Kontakt plugin. And you know what? Just for fun, because I'm here in Studio One version 6, I'm going to click on the little spanner icon here, and I'm going to go down to the part where it says channel icons and make sure that they're showing. Okay, and I'm going to select some channel icons. Let's go to, and what was the first one? It was a violin. Okay, so we'll go to strings and we will select violin. Okay, so we've got the icon there. We will select, this is, by the way, very useful to do. We will select strings, which is here, section strings. And then finally, we will select our brass. Let's just find brass in there. Okay, I'll just go brass section. That's fine. I say this is useful because this is going to be so helpful, isn't it, to know which one of these channels is which. And of course, what we can now do is go in and rename these channels. So this one is violin. This one is strings, and this one is brass. Okay, we don't need to have Kontakt open anymore, and now we can easily select. We know which instrument is which now. Of course, we can select them and we can play them, and we can mix them all individually. As I say, only using one instance of Kontakt. Now, the way we did that, as I say, is we already had our instruments in there, then we used that batch feature to create all of those outputs. But I just want you to be aware of some of the other ways that you can create these outputs. So we did kind of automatically create the new outputs that we wanted to in the previous example, but once in a while you may need to manually add in new channels, output channels for Kontakt to use. So let's just grab Kontakt again. We'll start afresh with an empty Kontakt here, and let's go about adding our own outputs. Okay, even when we've got no instruments loaded up, let's make sure that output section is showing. If it's not showing for you, then just go up to this icon here, make sure outputs is selected, and this time, rather than use a batch process, we're going to click on the plus button here to add some new outputs. So we'll click on that. Now this is where it gets a little sort of non-intuitive, to be honest with you, and why you may actually need a tutorial. I want to have one new output, but it's going to be a stereo output. So it needs two channels, a left and right channel for the stereo. So that's why the quantity here, I'm going to leave it default. The quantity is 1, okay, for one new output, but the number of channels it uses is 2, okay. Now again, this is where it gets a little bit non-intuitive. The next important selection is this one, the host output, okay, sound card stroke host output. Not so intuitive, but we're going to go ahead, select this, and what I want you to do is make sure you select the first of the auxiliary pairs. You can see here in this list of outputs, we've got auxiliary 1, 1 and 2, auxiliary 2, 1 and 2. Yeah, those are the stereo pairs. So make sure you select the first one of the first auxiliary pair. Click on that, okay, and then we can click on OK. That new channel is now created, okay. We could do it again. Click on plus. Again, we'll leave quantity on 1, the number of channels on 2, and we'll now go ahead and select the next stereo pair, the next stereo auxiliary pair, which is aux 2. Yeah, and the first one of those. Click on that, click on OK. This is really, I do wish that they would improve this. I'm not a fan of this at all. I think it's messy, but just so you know, this is how you would go about doing it. Now, of course, when we add our instruments in, which I'll do now, the first one here, this violin, if I'll just minimize that and go to its information, has been assigned to output stereo 1. Now, if we add in another violin, let's just do that. Okay, that appears there. Again, we'll go to its information icon, and you can see it's been assigned again to stereo 1. So you do need to make sure that you select its output. That would be stereo 2. Okay, so it will now come through on this channel. Okay, and you'll do that for your subsequent instruments as well. Now, again, although we've created these outputs in Kontakt, they haven't been connected to a channel in Studio One yet. It's the same process again, though. You would go over to your Kontakt instrument here in Studio One, expand it. Sorry, I'll just open it, try and open it again, expand it, and then select these outputs just to make sure they're enabled here in Studio One. That's the process of adding channels or outputs manually. Now I'm going to show you a method that you can use in Kontakt 7, which isn't available here in Kontakt 6, which is what I've been using. Now, Kontakt 7 has another batch process that we can use, which isn't available in the other versions. I'm going to start off by just dragging Kontakt 7 into our project. And I want to point out a couple of things about Kontakt 7 before I show you these batch processes. First of all, sometimes when you open it, especially if it's the first time you've used it, I think that you may have this view, okay? This is the sort of the new browser view. Very, very handy and nice way to find things. But ultimately, when you do find things, it just inserts them in the same way in Kontakt. If you are seeing this view, then of course you just toggle it on and off by clicking on this icon up here. Okay, so I'll just toggle it off so that we're back to our normal view. And the other thing is that the icons that we have up here are in a slightly different place to where they were before. Okay, so again, just so you know, I am showing the piano view there, and I'm showing the outputs view here as well, and I'm showing those by clicking on this icon and selecting them here. Okay, so it's a little bit of a different layout, but essentially it's all the same functions. Now, what if you're about to use Kontakt, and again, you want to create a whole bunch of outputs ready to use, okay, so that when you add instruments in, then those outputs are already available to you. We have this new batch preset available to us in Kontakt 7. So if we go down here, click on that. This time I'm going to go down to factory, okay, and you can see a whole bunch of choices available here, some different configurations for outputs which can be made available to us. I think these are really cool. If you just want 16 mono outputs, you can do that. 4 mono outputs, you can do that. Or 16 stereo outputs and 16 mono outputs, you can do that. So let's just go for a fairly typical setup, stereo 16. Okay, I'll just click on that, and you can see all of those outputs are already there and available for us to use. So we can go ahead, we can add in our instruments as we did earlier. I'll just minimize that again and click on the eye icon. We can see that's gone to output 1. I'll add in another instrument, and just as we saw before, I'll just minimize that, see its information. We just need to make sure we have the next output selected. Okay, so we can click on that, select output 2, and there we are. This instrument's already being routed to a different output. As before, however, we still have to connect these outputs to outputs in Studio One. And as I demonstrated before, you just go over to your Kontakt plugin over here, you click on that to expand it, and then you just enable those outputs by clicking on the check boxes like so. Okay, it's as simple as that, and a really nice new batch operation available there in Kontakt 7. So now that you've got multiple instruments coming from multiple outputs, you can of course process them all individually. Now what you might find is that many of these instruments share the same frequency space, and when that happens we can have the effect of them cancelling each other out. This is called masking. Now in order to counteract that, we've got a great new tool available in Studio One version 6, and that's the updated version of the Pro EQ. Now in version 3 it has dynamic EQ. That's incredibly useful for tackling masking. Watch my video about it right here and you can become a whiz at dynamic EQ.